system. I try to apologize. Right, so today I'm going to be talking about, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and I was happy to accept the invitation because it's always interesting when I get to talk, because I talk about emotional intelligence all the time. Today I'm not just going to talk about emotional intelligence, but I'm going to tie it into how Caribbean women have been able to use one aspect of emotional intelligence. And I want to use relationship management today, which is one of the pillars, right? So I'm not going to go through the whole thing that I did the last time, and then you say, oh, I came the last time. It's the same thing. It's not. So today the topic is celebrating Caribbean women who tell our stories and how relationship management can save us, because I do believe that it can. So I'm going to look at what relationship management is, and then I look at a basket, because we all have a basket that we're given like in the beginning of our lives, or that we have, whether we're given it or not. And I look at what the theme for Women's History Month is, and then women that I'm looking at, and then the wrap up. So we'll start with the basics. So relationship management. Relationship management is a pillar of emotional intelligence, and just so that I'm not looking back at Sam here. And so essentially what it expects is that you would build and maintain good relationships by your ability to communicate well, by your ability to understand cultures, work well in teams, and manage conflict. And that's it. If you're able to do those things, then you have relationship management covered. But it also relies on your ability to use the three other pillars of emotional intelligence, which are empathy, self-awareness, and self-regulation. That's it. But you need to remember all those things. So now, we move to this basket that I think we're given, or that we pick up as children. So when you start your life, let's say somewhere between 2 and 5, you actually form who you are as people. And there are a number of things that go into this basket by that time, and then after that time, you keep adding things to the basket as you go along. And sometimes we don't remember that we can actually toss things out of the basket when they no longer serve us. We just keep everything, and it confuses us. So some things are put into this basket of life experiences intentionally, and some get in there accidentally. And obviously you'd want to know which are the ones that are in there and how they got in there. So if things are intentional, it means that they're active and they're conscious. And you should be able to understand the difference between those things that are accidental and those things that are intentional. So what becomes important is understanding what is placed in the basket and then who put them there. So sometimes if you have someone who is in your inner circle and they tell you something, whether that is good or bad, you believe it because of the trust that you have reposed in that person. And that could be problematic if something negative is said to you. So if you've had a teacher who has told you, oh, you'll never amount to anything good, and you go through life believing, well, Ms. James told me that I would never be anything good. And so you don't have that expectation of yourself, and that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you know now that you have this basket, you can then think, well, what am I carrying in this, and why am I holding on to it? Why is it so heavy? If there are some things that you can shed as you go along, that would be fine. So there's sometimes that you have items that are placed in there by people, organizations, traditions, and repetitive practices, and you just keep going along with it. Then you have items that are placed in your basket by what is said and what is done, also what is not said, because we have to learn as adults now to be able to read between the lines. We don't often do that, but there are times when it's a blank page, there's a lot of information on there, and if you're not able to discern that information, then there's a bit of a problem. All right, so now that we've done that, the theme for this year is celebrating women who tell our stories, and that theme comes from the National Women's History Alliance. And they have identified these 12 women whom you may or may not recognize, but they're storytellers in their own rights. And I just took a little bit of what they said. They said from the earliest storytellers who pioneer in journalists, our experiences have been captured by a wide variety of artists and teachers. These include authors, songwriters, scholars, playwrights, performers, and grandmothers throughout time. Women have long been instrumental in passing on our heritage in word and in print to communicate the lessons of those who came before us. Women's stories and the larger human story expand our understanding and strengthen our connections with each other. So during this month, they've been having these sessions talking about these women and the work that they have done. I decided to choose not just Caribbean storytellers. Actually, I don't think anybody's really a storyteller in my set of women, but from each of them, I see how those women have been able to shape and in many cases direct the course of history of several Caribbean countries, not just other Caribbean women. So the first one I'm going to start with is Nanny. So Nanny, and ONH is Order of National Hero. Nanny is also known as the Queen of the Maroons. She was from Jamaica, so she was born in Ghana in 1686, and I went way back and I'm doing them in terms of age. So Nanny would have been the oldest person in my list. She died in Jamaica in 1733. That was a long time ago. None of us here have ever seen Nanny. And apparently the impression, or this is an artist's impression, and someone sat for that drawing, which is not what they teach, but that's how it was done. Why Nanny is important is because she was the leader of Jamaica's Windward Maroons. Now, Maroons were runaway slaves. So when the slave ships landed, not everyone was able to be transported to the plantations that they should have gone to. So some people escaped. And maroon comes from the Spanish word cimarron, which is also loosely translated from the French word marron, which means to escape or to get away, right? Wild or run away. So the Maroons they formed communities. Once they got away, they ran into the hills. So places that would not necessarily have had crops being cultivated, but they ran away there, and they still live there to this day. So Nanny was able to, she was trained, or she trained Maroons in guerrilla warfare, and she was able to keep her communities together. She had a brother who also had a group of Maroons, and between the two of them, she did not believe that if a slave got away and tried to come to their community, that they should be sent back. He, because there was a bounty, would send slaves back and they would get the bounty, right? So Maroons are both loved and hated in Jamaica because there's a dichotomy. There were two sets of them, right? So they were able to, in her case, she was able to hold off military power between 1724 and 1739. So they were British and Spanish, because Jamaica was embattled as well. So they were British and Spanish who were looking for slaves when they ran away. And she was very instrumental in keeping her communities together. They believed that she was a good Obia woman, so she had these spiritual powers and she would be able to protect her people, right? In 1975, she was declared a national hero. And now in Jamaica, her image is on the $500 bill. To this day, Jamaica still has Maroon communities. They live in 4 specific places, or they're 4 specific communities, basically in the hills. So they're in mountainous places. And those lands were given to them in 1739, 1739 and 1740. The lands were given to them by treaties from the British. So even though now Jamaica is independent, the Maroons still have their own territory. They're not governed by the laws of Jamaica, but they still live and practice their own religion and whatever. They trade in Jamaican dollars, but Nanny has been very instrumental in terms of Jamaica. And you'd find people who are very, I don't want to say grateful, but they're descendants of Nanny, and so they have that same rebellious attitude and understand that they could live in a society and not necessarily be a part of the society. And you know, that's still a part of Jamaica. The next person I have is Janet Jagan, who is a former president of Guyana. She was born in Chicago in 1920 and died in Guyana in 2009. She was born Janet Rosenberg. Her parents were Jewish, and she was a nurse, a student nurse, and her future husband who later became president of Guyana, was Chelly Jackson. He was a dental student. And so they met in 1942. They got married in 1943. They moved back to Guyana. They had 2 children, and she formed in 1946, the Women's Political and Economic Organization. So she became very political immediately. In 1950, they co-founded the People's Progressive Party, which is the party that is still in power, that is now in power in Ghana, I should say. She went through a lot of things. In 1955, she was in prison. She and her husband were imprisoned for 5 months, and then they were put under house arrest for 2 years because Winston Churchill felt that they had communist ties. And, you know, they're long arms of places like England, and so they were being monitored. And in 1973, of course, when they got out of jail and then went on the house arrest, they were still mobilizing and organizing and stuff like that. And because she had come from living here and understanding that there could be, you know, things like adult suffrage and women could have different rights and that sort of thing, she started organizing in Ghana. So in 1973, she was elected to Parliament, and then again in 1980, 1985, 1982. Then she became the first female president of Ghana in 1997, a position that she held until 1999, when she got sick and she resigned. She would have been the 4th female president in the Western Hemisphere. So the first was from Iceland, and then Dominica, Dame Eugenia Charles, and then Nicaragua. In 1993, she got the Order of Excellence, which is the highest national award in Guyana. 1999, she got the UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Award for Women's Rights. So she's been doing a lot of work within the Caribbean, and she was recognized for all that work that she'd been done. And then the photo that I chose here was a commemorative stamp, which has 4 photos of her different stages of her life. And in the first one, so the one closest to me, that's the United Nations emblem at the bottom there. So she did serve as ambassador, Guyana's ambassador to the United Nations at one point. Then there are other photos there when the second one, she was much younger, and then when she was older. I use this stamp because, fun fact, the most rare stamp in the world is actually from Guyana. So when I saw this photo, I'm like, I get to talk about the black magenta. So that stamp is now worth over $11 million. Not this one, but the black magenta. It's not a part of this story, but I thought I could segue. And she was actually nicknamed as Blue-Eye Bauji, as I have at the bottom there. So Bauji is actually Hindustani for sister-in-law, and generally you would refer to like an Indian woman who is in familiar circumstances. She would just be like Bauji, say, hey Bauji, whatever, and say, and in her case, because she was white, she's Blue-Eye Bauji. So if you tell any Guyanese, oh, I'm talking about Blue-Eye Bauji, they know exactly who it is. Then the next person I have is Calypso Rose. So Calypso Rose, her real name is MacArthur Lewis, and she was born in Tobago, as in Trinidad and Tobago, in 1940. She is a Calypsonian, and a Calypsonian is someone who sings Calypso music. Generally, a Calypsonian is able to tell stories about what is happening in a specific time. She started writing when she was 13 years old and is considered the mother of Calypso. She's written over 1,000 songs and has more than 23 albums. So she's in her 80s now. And then in 1966, she won the Calypso King and the Virgin Islands Road March. Of course, back then, since they weren't women, it was Calypso King. And since then, she's been able to, because of her, I would say, they've changed the name of the competition. And so now it's a Calypso Monarch. So women are actually able to get into it. So in her case, she went through a lot of struggles, and she talks about it when she performs, because they didn't have dressing rooms for women, like separate dressing rooms. When they had rehearsals, they weren't, necessarily conducive For women, like the spaces, they would have them, and the places she would have to pass to go to rehearse and all of that. All those things weren't conducive. So she was able to get a lot changed, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but across the region. Then in 1977, she won the Road March. So the Road March is the song that is played most on the road when the revelers are out in their costume, and you would get a prize for that. So she won that prize in 1977. And that's the first time that it was acknowledged and given to her, because she had won 4 times before, but because they weren't giving prizes to women, she couldn't get it. Then in 1978, she won Trinidad's Calypso Monarch. 1983, she was honored as the top female calypsonian by the Smithsonian. She lives in New York, well, she lives between New York and Trinidad. And then in 2014, she got a Doctor of Letters from the University of the West Indies. And then in 2017, she was awarded the Order of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And you notice I keep talking about things that people were awarded and, you know, national honors and so on. Because in the Caribbean, honorifics are still a big thing for us, because we came from British, and you know, for the British, once you get awarded something, it's a big deal. And so a lot of this is important and shapes how we look at stuff and how we interact with others. The next person I have is Alpharetta Constantia Rita Marley. And we may or may not know Rita Marley. Most people probably know Rita Marley. She was a member of the I3s, and she used to be married to Bob Marley. She was married to Bob Marley from 1966 to 1981 when he died. She used to manage him on the road, but she had a career in her own right. She was a singer, and he actually got her to record. He was not at all the most popular reggae singer from Jamaica, but because of how her work and how she managed his business, it now appears that Bob Marley was the biggest thing from Jamaica. She has to get all the credit for that. So she managed him on the road, and he needed a lot of management. Apparently he was, he was an introvert in some sense, but I don't know how this works. Like, I don't know how an introvert ends up with 11 children by 7 women. I don't know how that happens. Right? He was not. He was in somebody else. So she, when he would go to performances, and then after, you know, fans would come to meet him backstage and so on, she would be tasked with, or she would give herself the task, according to Judy Mowatt, she would go into places and sort of get women to leave, you know, because, listen, we gotta go, there's another show tomorrow, we can't be having this, you know. And she would wrangle people together, and, you know, they would go. She had 6 children, only 3 of them were with Bob, but I don't know how she was able to keep her sanity, because in that time it wasn't as structured as it is now, meaning when he died there was no will. So it's not like she knew, all right, well, if this man dies, at least I'm going to get da-da-da-da-da. And he was 36 when he died. So, you know, there's no way, given the structure back then, that she knew she was going to end up inheriting all of these things. Not to mention, she was already raising children that didn't belong to her. You know, in this time, it'll probably be like, you and these children gotta go. It wouldn't be like, oh yeah, well, let's bring them on, I'm gonna raise everybody. So she has a good story, well, she has a story that we could all learn from. I don't know if it's good or bad, but you know, you kind of think, well, I don't know if I could be Rita Marley. But then if she didn't do what she did, we would not have had the legacy of Bob that we have today. So after he passed, and there's a lot that happened. There was a shooting. She was shot. She wasn't the target, but she was shot. She had a bullet lodged in her brain. He was going to perform at a peace concert, and they didn't want him to perform, and so they went by the house, and they were both there, and she was hit by a stray bullet. Then they went to the hospital. He got bandaged up and whatever, and they both appeared the night of the concert. And they were warring factions. They still are. If you know anything about Jamaica, that's what they do best. They're warring factions. And he was able to hold up. There's a very popular picture of him holding the hands of 2 politicians over his head, right? And this is on stage. So after he passed, and he passed from cancer, which apparently, according to rumor or legend, he was injected with this cancer, and then he passed away shortly thereafter, because he was doing a lot of humanitarian work that was beginning to make a difference, you know, and somebody wanted that silenced. So in 1986, she turned their home into the Bob Marley Museum that exists today in Kingston, Jamaica. She doesn't live there. Once we made it into a museum, it became like a national treasure. And then in 1996, she was awarded the Order of Distinction by Jamaica. And then again in 2019, she was given another national award, Order of Jamaica. So those two awards are the 5th and 6th highest of their awards. Yeah, and that's it about Rita Marley. The next person I have is Shakira Bash. So Shakira Bash, she used to be a secretary at the U.S. Information Service Office in Guyana. She was born in Guyana, yes.
Didn't she have a baby with Bob too?
No.
Wait, no, I know it was like, is it, okay.
Cindy Breakspear.
Okay, see, I went from. Okay.
Right, so she was a secretary at this U.S. Information Service office, and the office was bombed, and she was 16 at the time when she started working there as a secretary. The office was bombed, she got a scar on her face, and she lost hearing in one of her ears. And she wanted a way to get out of Guyana. And so someone convinced her to go into the Miss Guyana pageant, which she did, and she won in 1967. And then she stayed in London. This is after she participated in the Miss World of the same year, and she was 3rd runner-up. So she had a career in modeling and as an actress. And then Sir Michael Caine saw her. Oh, before I get to that part. She was in 2 movies, so 1969, Carry On Again Doctor, and 1975, The Man Who Would. Never saw any of those movies, but Man Who Would Be King. Corey might have, because Corey has a very deep repository of movies. And then in 1971, she appeared in a Maxwell House commercial. And Michael Caine, who was a popular British actor, he saw this commercial. And he's like, oh my God, I'm going to marry this woman. He was married at the time, right? But he tracked her down, left his wife, and he's married her. They've been married for over 50 years. They have 1 child and 2 grandchildren, apparently.
What?
And
Wow.
you see why this is like a legendary thing? See? So, and he is...
Lady Kane.
Yeah, exactly. Because he is Sir Michael Caine. He was knighted. And because he's a commander of the British Empire. That's what the CBE means. And because he is knighted, then she became Lady Caine. Right? She's Muslim, and I put that there because he is Christian and has remained Christian. And she's Muslim, and they live together while she goes every place with him. Like I said, they have a child and grandchildren, etc. So there's that. So, and this is a story that I have been told as a child. Like my mother told me this story. So we knew that, you know, Shakira Bash was legendary. Then Valerie Amos, she was born in then British Guyana in 1954. She's now the Right Honourable the Baroness Valerie Amos. Of course, all those honorifics are British. She is a British Labour Party politician and diplomat, and she was an undersecretary to the UN under Ban Ki-moon, so she's been a diplomat for a little while. Between 1989 and 1994, she served as the chief executive of the Equal Opportunities Commission, and that was a voluntary position, so in addition to the work that she was doing, she was working for equal opportunities. In 1997, she became leader of the House of Lords, so, and I put life peer in brackets because that's a position that you have to be given, you don't inherit a title. So that's how she got the Baroness title. And then in 2003, she was Secretary of State for International Development. So that's like a ministerial position, so you serve in the cabinet. So, but this is all British. And she became the first Black, Asian, minority ethnic person. So Britain has a lot of classes and strata, as we know. So it was important to say that. And then between 2003 2007, she was Lord President of the Privy Council. And so we were looking at her from the Caribbean like, wow, she's achieving all these things. Because obviously, because several of the countries were colonized by British, then we know, when people are elevated. And in 2015, she became director of SOAS University of London, and she was the first black woman to lead a school in the UK. And this is 2015. It's not that long ago. I can remember what I did in 2015. So just to show you how Britain is still, in their system, classist system, right? Then in 2020, she became Master of University College of Oxford, and she's the first female and first black head in the United Kingdom, in all of the United Kingdom, right? So we haven't come that far from where, as to where we could be. And then in 2022, she became Lady Companion of the Order of the Garter, which is the highest of the knighthoods that you could get. And so we are very proud of her and understand that maybe with hard work, you can get elevated into the Queen's inner circle. Yeah. The next person is Barbados' Prime Minister. And I'm hoping as I'm getting closer to real time, we actually know some of these people. So this is Mia Motley, Honorable Mia Amor Motley, SC. She's a senior counsel, so she's been a lawyer for a long time. She's the daughter of a politician who was a New York consul from Barbados, so she'd been in and out of the US and doing international travel and so on. She went to school, she went to London School of Economics. She was also in a class with one of St. Lucia's prime ministers, Dr. Kenny Anthony. They were in the same class. She joined the Barbados Labour Party in 1991. Between 1994 and 2008, she held 3 different ministerial posts within governments in Barbados. So she was Minister of Education and Culture, she was Attorney General and Minister of Home Affairs, she was also Economic Affairs, Minister of Economic Affairs. And then in 2018, she was elected as the first female Prime Minister of Barbados. Now she does a lot of the bidding for the Caribbean in terms of how things that we want said in different places. Mia is the person who goes to the UN and says what needs to be said. And she's very eloquent in the way that she says it. Because she's a very cultured person. She used to manage a jazz band and that kind of thing. So very cultured. And well-traveled, and she really loves her culture as well. So most times when you hear her speak, she'd quote like a Bob Marley song, she would quote like a Peter Tosh song or whatever, and then she goes from there. She started, I remember one time, this is just recently, she was talking about climate change, and she started, bless my eyes this morning, Jason is on the rise again, but there's so much trouble in the world. And people were just surprised, like Prime Minister would get up in the UN and say something like that. But that's kind of what she does. She also said that now the world still looks so much like it did when it was part of an imperialistic power. And that's important. She was talking about climate change and all the work that the Caribbean is expected to do to get up to this 1.5 to stay alive that we're expecting everybody to do in terms of the emissions and everything else. And why that is important is because she said for the money that we need to borrow in the Western Hemisphere and well, Sub-Saharan Africa, the money that we need to borrow, we borrow that money at like 14%. Whereas here in developed countries, the money gets lent to us between 1% and 4%. So there's a significant difference in what you'd be able to do when you have a loan that is stifling your economy, because you can't pay it back like you should, and then it limits what you can and can't do.
Like Haiti.
Pardon?
Haiti. Like Haiti.
Oh, well, Haiti's a whole different story. We could talk for hours on Haiti. And then in May 2022, and I chose that picture because she was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world, which we thought was such a good honor because she'd come in and she really started making a difference immediately. And then we were trying to get her to be Prime Minister of the Caribbean. No post like that exists, but we think she'd be like a really good Prime Minister of the Caribbean. But because, everybody thinks that their own little rock is the most important rock, none of the men are going to accede to Mia Mottley. So that's where we're at. I want to play two things that she actually said, and she's the one person whose clips I took. Let's see here. All right, so in this clip, this guy, let me go back to the beginning. This is when they were talking about the referendum. Barbados was going to become a republic, so they were getting rid of the Queen, and then the Queen died, and they were getting rid of the King at that point. Actually, no, the Queen died after. The Queen died after. But they were getting rid of the Queen, they wanted to become a republic, so he was asking her about that and why they wanted to do that. And then he asked her something else. So I'm going to play this because I think her answer was brilliant.
You've also said that you'll hold a referendum on gay marriage. For that next generation, should they be allowed to be gay in Barbados?
Sorry?
Should people in Barbados be allowed to be gay, to be homosexual?
Is that a question you would ask the United Kingdom?
Well, we have laws on gay marriage, and you're having a referendum on gay marriage, so it is pertinent.
I think that is the most inappropriate question as to whether a person should be allowed to be gay. I think the question is, should we discriminate against people because they're gay? And we will not. And we're absolutely clear that Barbados became the first black slave society, and a country that has known what it is to discriminate against citizens for centuries cannot in today's world be discriminating against any human being for any reason whatsoever.
So homosexuality will be legal in Barbados, as will gay marriage?
I said that a country that discriminates against people will not do it. That has discriminated against people in the past. But what is more, the government is resolute that marriage is a function of the church. And to that extent, a referendum will be held to allow all parties to determine whether they will speak on the church or not, on the marriage or not. But with respect to civil unions, we believe that that is a function of civil rights. And to that extent, there shall be no discrimination against any person, whether gay, whether straight, whether black, whether white, whether short, whether tall, for any reason in this country. And that is the position of our government.
Prime Minister, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Country.
One last.
Yeah, so that was a little shocking, and he doubled down on it. After he said, and she said sorry, he continued. So what he should have done, if he knew his social cues, he said, oh, I'm sorry, that's the end of my interview. But he was not smart enough to do that. Then this other one, no, I think this was right after the climate change one. This is kind of the best video I have of it, so I'm just going to let me skip this and make it larger. And please.
A lot of Western climate diplomats tell me is that leaders like yourself also carry responsibility. Why are vulnerable countries still so debt-stricken? Why is there still corruption? What is your response to that?
You really want me to answer you?
I do.
Okay. Why is it that every time we talk about countries from the South, the first allegation is corruption? Last time I checked, in the USA and the UK and Europe, they're riddled with corruption, but nobody says that they're not capable of achieving their objectives because of corruption. Why is it that we're not talking about the fact that these countries became independent, having allowed those countries that colonized them to extract significant portions of their wealth, such that we had no proper housing, no proper education, no proper healthcare systems, no proper legal systems, no proper across the whole stream, and certainly nothing to do with building social capital like community development and cultural enterprises. And what has happened is therefore that we have spent the time since independence trying to give our people what the global north has taken for granted and has supported by the extrication of centuries of wealth to give their people out of our blood, sweat and tears. Now when our blood, sweat and tears finances the Industrial Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution then causes a climate crisis, and then I have to pay for the consequences of the climate crisis because of the Industrial Revolution financed by our blood, sweat and tears, then I think they have no moral authority to tell me anything about the financing of the climate or about why we don't have enough.
Is it anger over this that fuels your energy?
Anger? Absolutely not. Unfairness, lack of justice. They're not angry. I'm just disappointed that humankind still wants to believe that there's one world for set of people and another world for another set.
Jesus.
So I just got back from Walmart today.
Right, so I thought those two were good.
Girl, boss.
Exactly. So see, this is why I like Leon. That as well. So I think with her, one of the things we understand, she uses every opportunity to educate people. And she got both of them together real quick. I think the second lady was not prepared. She didn't know what could happen, or there were two places where she could have stopped and did not. She just kept going, you know. So sometimes when you understand who you are in a space, you're able to, and she was very eloquent, she didn't raise her voice, but notice she reached for the typical bias, angry black woman. Well, is that why you're angry? Angry? What are you talking about? I'm not angry. You know, but she didn't understand that could have happened. So
I think there's always a blind spot of people not recognizing the double standard.
Absolutely.
You know, the questions that get, I mean, that happened both times. The
Yes.
questions that seem to get answered or asked by, you know, developed countries versus developing countries.
Yes, yes. The next person I have is the right excellent Robin Rihanna Fenton, who was born in 1988 in Barbados. I must say her mother's Guyanese, her father's from Barbados. We know Rihanna, she's a singer, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and she has a child that doesn't have a name, so, you know, we've seen the child, but he doesn't have a name. In 2018, she was made by Mia Motley Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary. And then in 2021, she was named National Hero of Barbados. And we're very happy about that. Everybody, we know Rihanna, so I don't need to belabor the work that Rihanna is doing, and you know. In some cases, we're a little disappointed that she's not singing a lot of Caribbean music, but you know, we can't lay everything on her the way we want to lay everything on Michelle Obama over here. So we'll let her be for now. And then the last person that I have is Letitia Wright, who is an actress. She was born in 1993 in Guyana. In 2018, she got global recognition as Shuri in the Black Panther. She got an NAACP award and SAG awards for it. And then in 2022, she became the Black Panther in Wakanda Forever. Earlier this year, so in February, last month actually, she went back to Guyana after a number of years. She left Guyana when she was 10, I think. And she went back and she did a whole tour and was honored and so on. She got keys to the city, she got a gold pendant, she got a lot of stuff. And she also got an honorary doctorate by the University of Guyana. So those are the women I have. How did they do it? I think they communicated well. They understood the cultures, not just their own, but because many of these women left and went to other places and still excelled, still gave us something to look back at and look up to, right? They worked well in teams. Nobody here did anything on their own. Nobody. Every person had a team around them. And then they managed conflict because, of course, none of this was easy. Everybody there had a story of being denied something, of having to rise above their own comfort zone and, you know, stuff like that. So those are the things that we have to do as women to be able to manage. And we want men to be allies. So I'm happy that there are men in the room because we want men to be allies. Because this is not an anti-men thing. Whenever we talk about Women's History Month, we need men to be there because they have to help guide us and understand. You might need to open the door for us because if we get in, then we'll do the best that we can. And these women show that they've gotten into spaces and they've really done well, you know. So that is it. So thank you very much. Any questions? All right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Luncheon, for that wonderful presentation. Can we give another round of applause? As our token of appreciation, we'd like to present to you with this pin to represent the colorful, powerful, successful Black woman. I saw you and I was like, it looks like her. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Nothing today. I'm going with my party pants.
Yes. And to everyone who was able to attend this event, we want to say thank you. Our next event will be the 3 African American women who changed the course of American history on Monday the 27th at 7 p.m. at the Buchanan Hall in the Music Building. We hope to see you there. Thank you for coming.